So then item number 35, which is to establish the city marshal office, clerk marshal office. This was pulled by council members Tobo, Alter, and I pulled that as well. Let's real quickly, Kathy, why don't you say why you pulled it or what your concern was or what you want to have addressed, then Allison, you can do that, then I'll do that, and then we'll go to staff.
So I think in terms of the big picture of the questions I have, they range from what would be the financial efficiencies. Let me back up and say I know we once had a Marshall program and it was discontinued, and I'm interested in understanding better why the shift. I know that part of this is, at least I thought part of it was about financial efficiencies and other kinds of improvements in line with our reimagining policing conversation. Yet I know from talking, I know from reviewing some of the concerns from community members that doesn't, it's hard to understand exactly how this functions within that. It wasn't, and I guess I also have some questions about the process of vetting this and how much of a community process it's been. It doesn't appear to have been something that our reimagining task force has discussed. And so my questions range from, really understanding how it would function, what the training is, what does oversight and accountability look like, what kinds of responsibilities they would have, and how it would fit into our existing system, including state regulations for peace officers. So in my mind, this is a pretty big shift, and there are a lot of component questions, and I'm not sure that I will be ready by Thursday to take this big jump without really fully understanding exactly how it's going to work.
Allison.
Good morning. So first I wanted to say that I believe that the courts have an undeniable need for security for the safety of everyone. What I'm trying to grapple with and understand is whether the best way to meet those needs is by creating a new law enforcement agency, which is essentially what this seems to be doing. I have concerns about the transparency, the training, the accountability, the efficiency, as I mentioned. As Councilmember Togo mentioned, also trying to understand how this fits in with the reimagining. We would be spending over $2 million to create this, and I have questions about where those funds are coming from and what those budgetary commitments look like in light of the environment. If we have an issue with security at our municipal courts, which we most definitely do, I'm just not sure if there are better ways to address that, and if the time and energy that would be put into creating this new law enforcement agency might be better put into making sure that the academy is running smoothly and we get APD recruits through that process who can serve in this role, because there seems to be some underlying assumptions. So I have questions along those lines about how a new chief would be selected, et cetera. And I think it might be more appropriate just to ask the questions, when appropriate.
Okay. And then I pulled this in part because I also think it's a big change and obviously of significant issue in several of the communities that are involved in kind of reimagining policing. So I pulled it to better understand some of the elements. Obviously, we have to take care of the increased security needs that's been demonstrated. The question is, what's the best way to do that? In first blush on this, there's a desire for us to try and download from our APD officers some of the things that we're asking them to do that maybe it's not best for them to do, so that they can focus on the things that APD can uniquely do. So in that respect, having something like this would make sense in that context. One of the questions that had been raised was whether or not, how does this get accounted for in relation to House Bill 1900? Does this count as increased funding to APD that we can't change in the future under House Bill 1900? My understanding is, that I'd like confirmation on, is that this happens outside of the APT budget, so it's not part of the legislative scheme, and the council could gear it up or gear it down, or the council could. I also want to know, is this kind of like the arson investigators that are in the fire department? My understanding is that there are some, in essence, police parallels within the fire department that are not, they don't report to the police chief, they report to the fire chief in that department. I think they're part of the fire department budget and not part of the police department budget. So I guess my question is this kind of a parallel thing to that? And then the last question I had was with respect to training. Is the training that's required of someone in this position going through the full cadet class that we have for police? Or is there some shorter, less involved training that we would require of someone who was doing security in the courts? If that was the case, then that might be a reason to consider it, because it would, again, download work from APD and let us take the existing officers we have and better deploy them on the front lines to be actually fighting crime. So let's check and see if other people on the dais have any questions they want to daylight before we go to staff. Councilmember Kitchen.
I have, thank you. I do have the same question, so I won't repeat those, but I do have a little bit, one additional question that's sort of related. First off, let me say I also recognize the importance and the need for security at the court. So my questions are not related to whether or not it's needed. I would like, as you're answering the questions that others have asked, I would like to understand more specifically the time crunch. Because from my perspective, if I'm reading this correctly, you're going to be continuing with APD officers over the next 18 months or whatever anyway, because it would take a while to set up a city marshal office. So it just appears to me that we should do the analysis first before we reach the conclusion that we need a city marshal office, because we're not able to make the change immediately anyway. So I just want to understand, I think others have mentioned this, I need to see a better nexus or understanding that the need results in this approach. And I also think we need to engage with the community more, to actually, with the Public Safety Commission. And I appreciate the suggestion that was made that that working through operational policies is something that would be done with the commission, but that's after the fact. That's after we've created it. And I think they need to be engaged up front in the conversation, more engaged up front in the conversation, along with an analysis of what the potential options are. So those are the concerns that I had.
I've got
Yeah,
a
Rose?
question, just so I'm up to speed. Maybe the municipal court clerk, can you talk about, I see that some of the members of the Public Safety Committee aren't here. I do remember this coming up quite a long time ago. Can you kind of give me a brief rundown of how the topic got approached and why it might have been deemed necessary through that process?
Before you do that. Other questions from the dais? We're going to hear all the questions, daylight the questions, then we're going to go to staff.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry, I didn't understand.
That's okay.
I was just curious, have you all taken this issue to the council's Public Safety Committee? Because I think that may be a good avenue for additional review and discussion.
Okay, we'll add that to the list.
Thanks.
Colleagues, anything else before we turn it over to staff? Councilmember Tovo?
Yeah, just one thing, I didn't preface my comments in the same way that my colleagues did. So I also want to just really emphasize that I am committed to making sure that we have security at our municipal court. So my questions are absolutely within that framework as well.
I think we're all unified on that. All right, you've heard a whole list of questions. You want to help us?
There are multiple people that are going to need to answer multiple questions. But I'll start with the broad overview. This was not.
Would you introduce yourself, please, for the record? That's okay.
I'm sorry. I'm
Judge.
Sherry Statman. I'm the presiding judge, and this is Mary Jane Grubb. She is the clerk of the court.
Thank you.
This is not our first choice. And as part of the reimagining initiative, it was determined that the officers that have been at court are needed to go back to APD to perform other duties. So this is not what we wanted. We certainly do not want to be in the law enforcement business. We are a court. We're not a branch of law enforcement. This is something that is quite new to us. There was a Marshall program in the past. Neither one of us have dealt with a Marshall program. So we're starting from ground zero. The primary purpose is court security. Really, the only purpose is court security. I heard and respect the concerns of the Public Safety Commission. They are concerned that having peace officers with the authority to arrest means that this is going to function like other Marshall programs in other cities. We're Austin. We don't do what they do. We don't arrest people and bring them to court. We do not send them out on some kind of patrol to arrest people. We haven't done that in years. We don't want to do that. Anybody that comes to court with an active warrant can come into court. They're not arrested. Even if they aren't able to resolve it, they walk out. There are certain duties, both at municipal court and the downtown Austin Community Court, that can only be done by peace officers. That includes, take this off, taking people into custody. And one of the agreements on how to handle the camping cases is that instead of taking people to the jail, the central booking facility, APD is going to bring them directly to DACC or municipal court. And we will try to get them the services that they need at that time. In order to do that, they are under arrest. They need to be taken into court by a peace officer at court. So we have to have them. There's a few other things that only peace officers can do. So that's where we are. And again, we hear and we respect the concerns of the community, and we are willing and want to work with advocates to develop something that is, like Austin, different and upholds the values of this city. Let's see.
Hi, I'm going to address a little bit of the financial efficiency piece. There was $2.7 million approved in the fiscal year 22 budget for this. That is a little bit higher than what APD has been spending the last few years because it does include significant startup costs, uniforms, equipment, cars, computers, things of that nature. In the long run, it is slightly cheaper, but there's not a significant cost savings for this. It is primarily, I think most of the cost savings would be in the increased training that APD officers are required to have for their full breadth of duties. However, again, not significant. I don't have the exact difference. I can get that to you. I have it. I just don't have it with me.
Ray, do you want to also speak? I know that you're here as well.
Can we get further clarity, though, on the budget? Can I?
Yes.
Can I ask a follow-up on the budget?
On the last statement?
Yeah.
Yes.
So where is that budget? Is it in the APD budget or in the municipal court budget? Because they're APD officers.
It's in the municipal court budget.
Okay, so above and beyond the APD budget, the I think 14 officers were being paid for out of the municipal court.
That is
Okay.
correct.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay, thank you.
Ray, do you want to speak to this? Are we ready to do this here? No?
Mayor, I had a follow-up question about the budget as well.
Okay.
So thanks for that response. I think what I understood you to say is that it is a little more expensive in the beginning because of the startup costs, including uniforms. Over the long run, it's a little cheaper, but the main differential is the training piece. Is that, I wanted to be sure I understood you correctly, that the main difference in cost has to do with the training curriculum for APD officers, but I didn't completely understand that remark.
So there's a couple of factors involved. Training is one, overtime is another. Those are things that could likely be eliminated in terms of overtime. APD is having to utilize that a lot right now to fund the program. These would be full-time positions dedicated to the municipal court with very little overtime involved. And again, the training is less extensive.
Okay, thank you.
Ray?
Thank you, Mayor. And again, Ray Ariano, Assistant City Manager. I've been working closely with the municipal court to bring this item forward. And then by way of background, Council will recall that you approved several resolutions in June 2020 that formed the basis of the city's Reimagining Public Safety Initiative. And in particular, resolution number 2020-0611-096 directs the city manager in part to explore options for reallocating positions and roles currently assigned to the Austin Police Department that could be managed by other departments. And so it's in this light that we bring forth item number 35. I'll say generally that a marshal program managed by the municipal court would represent a more efficient and smaller investment in fully licensed peace officers with the specialized training to operate in a court environment as compared with the breadth of training that's required of APD officers, which is what Mary Jane Grubb had mentioned as well. I mean, I think part of the focus that we heard certainly from we mentioned public safety advocates and so forth, the task force, certainly was to try to focus on de-escalation techniques whenever possible, and that could certainly be a focus of a marshal program developed under the municipal court. Certainly want to address that it's always daunting when we're starting up a new program, and APD will be right there, again, providing security services along this path, as well as providing advice. I think in terms of training, that has yet to be determined. It hadn't occurred to me that they would be included in APD's training academy. I think one of the things that Mary Jane had mentioned is in terms of the training that marshals would not be required to get the full breadth of training that we require currently of our APD officers. And so that would be a time savings. Certainly they would be required to get the training that would make them a certified peace officer under Texas statute, TCOL. And in terms of, and so Mayor, your characterization of these peace officers would be similar to what we have for arson investigators within Austin Fire Department. Let's see, there was a question with regard to Public Safety Committee. Hearing this item, we did approach both the Public Safety Committee chair as well as Public Safety Commission chair, and in the case of Public Safety Committee, they deferred hearing this particular item. And we did get an opportunity, to, as you are aware, to make a presentation to the Public Safety Commission. Trying to see what other questions occur to me at this moment. Let me go ahead and pause there and see what questions you may have.
Was there an item on this, Ray, in the budget that we approved?
So as I'm understanding, there was an item that was approved to form the marshal program under the municipal court. And yes, it's perhaps either law department or Ed Vanino, our CFO, can be more specific, who's knowledgeable about HB 1900. But this funding and resource would be outside of the HB 1900 purview, if I'm not mistaken.
I haven't found it yet, but someone told me that this was actually in our budget that we approved in June. Is that true?
I believe it is.
Okay.
And I guess Mary Jane could probably address that it's in their budget.
So the dollars were approved in the budget to stand up the Marshall program for security? Okay. So to answer the question, this is in front of us now because we asked for this to come to us now. I think is the simple answer to that question.
Yes, from both the budget perspective and the resolution back in June.
Okay. So my sense of this, and I don't know, this is a big decision. It's a significant change. It was something that we asked for. Thank you for bringing it back to us. If our Marshall program, if we were to have one, is different, as the presiding judge tells us in Austin, it needs to be different. I think fleshing that out a little bit more about what it is that's different about this, what is the scope or scale, kind of what Councilmember Kitchen was talking about. Before we authorize it, can we have a better feel for what it is if we did this, how to describe this? Real specifically, what is the different training? What is the training associated? What is their role and responsibility? What things will they do? What things will we be saying specifically that they're not going to be doing that I think folks are concerned about? I'm very much open to doing this. I'm not sure we're quite ready to do this, as Councilmember Tobo said on Thursday, for us to act, because I think it's a bigger issue than that. But if it enables us to get 12 more officers on patrol under the existing kind of APD structure, then I think there might be a reason to take the officers out of there if that's not core to the crime fighting function that we ask APD to do, so long as they're not associated negatives with that, which I think are some of the concerns that I've heard. But I don't think that you're setting up a program that would create those concerns. But I'm also interested in you guys being involved in that process so that you're not coming up to us and saying this is not our choice. I mean, I would like it to be something that was crafted, that you said this is our choice and serves us well.
So I want to speak a little bit to the timeline and the process. The process is once the council has to approve the ordinance establishing authority for the office, for the marshal office. After that, then we would then apply for an agency with TCOL and the DPS and concurrently start recruiting for a chief marshal position. To do that and then get a chief marshal onboarded, that person would be responsible for really setting up the program, developing the policies and procedures, and then hiring the deputies. And then once the deputies are hired, then you have to purchase uniforms and equipments. The cars take a really long time, so that's where we're getting to the 18, possibly longer months for this program. And I fully agree with having community engagement to develop the policies for the program, but I think it's extremely important, and I mean, honestly, I think it's required. You have to have an agency, you need to have a chief marshal on board to be a part of that program. That person needs to be in on the ground level, developing it, first of all, for buy-in and to provide input. And we can't hire a chief marshal without an agency, and we can't have an agency without the council approving that. So I understand the appearance and the perception is kind of the horse before the cart, but there's certain things that we have to do before we can even hire a chief marshal, and I think that's really instrumental.
Councilmember Poole and Councilmember Kitchen.
So this reminds me a little bit about the conversations we've been having over on the Capital Metro Board and the establishment of a specific corps that has training in the details and is familiar with transit-oriented operations and providing safety for riders on the buses and the operators of the buses. And I think in terms of the specialty, the special nature of the work that happens at our courts, and I remember the incident a few years ago where we had a shooting in Austin that was targeting one of our district judges. And that is why I very much appreciate the focus that you all are bringing to this. I recognize that this is a difficult concept for some to accommodate and think about, but the fact is this sort of distinct and discrete training for officers and deputies would provide a level of protection to our court workers, to our judges, to the community who is there for what can be very emotional reasons, and an overall sense of the civil society nature of the judicial work that you are doing, and the very real imperatives of protecting everybody who walks through those doors. And so I recognize the difficulty of the conversation. I am supportive of what you are hoping to do here, not only because it was a direction in our budget from last summer, but because I do think it's an appropriate approach, a right approach, and it takes into the context of the current constructs that we're living through at this point.
Councilor Kitchen.
Well, I have two comments. So the first comment is, it just goes back to, I'm not yet hearing why this is the approach, and what analysis was done that points to this being the approach as opposed to continuing as you are right now. What I'm kind of hearing is that the thinking is that you would be able to train officers with less, not having to go through the full training, if I understood what Ray was saying. And I can see where that might be some value, but we're not saving any time here because the APD, as you said, it takes a while to set up an office. So I'm not saying that this isn't the right approach. I just haven't heard an analysis that tells me that this, so City Manager, I'm not hearing an analysis that's telling me that this is the right approach, so that's one thing. The second thing is a suggestion. If we move forward with this, and I agree with Councilmember Poole that looking to what was done with Cap Metro can be informative. One of the things that they did, because the same kind of questions were raised by the public as we were going into that, they put in place, or we did as part of Cap Metro, we put in place what the parameters were before we created the office. So in other words, we along with our action to create an office, one of the things we did is we stated that we were going to create a community advisory committee, and we had a timeline that would be done by. I'm not suggesting that it's the same parameters that have to be used. I'm just saying that the issue that you raise about having to create the office and then do the operational policies, that doesn't provide any assurance to the public. I hear what you're saying, and I trust that, and I know that we operate differently with our municipal office, but that really needs to be in writing somewhere that's tied to the creation of an office like this. And so that we can all be clear and understanding what would be happening going forward. And so there are options to do that. I'm not certain what all those parameters ought to be, but I just think at the point that this council, if this council decides to go forward and at whatever point that decision is made, it ought to be done with very specific parameters that responds to the concerns that we're hearing from the public. But my first question is really, I would like to see an analysis about why this is the best approach. I'm open to it, certainly open to it, and I can guess what might be some reasons for efficiencies, but I haven't seen a piece of paper that's really telling me that.
Kathy? And then Allison.
Yeah, I think I'm in exactly the same place. And so in looking through, really, in my fabulous staff member Ashley's looking through the Q&A, we all had lots of questions about this during the budget Q&A that are relevant, I think, to the conversation, but it still lands me in the same place, I think, that you articulated, Councilmember Kitchen. This may be exactly the right approach. If so, it will be the right approach for reasons other than financial ones, because there doesn't seem to be a cost savings there. The operational issue that was highlighted, at least in some of the budget Q&A that we had, or our conversations with staff about really getting those 12 officers back to patrolling, is not something that's going to happen quickly, as Councilmember Kitchen mentioned. And so it really has to be about how they function. But I do think we have those fundamental questions to ask. It's my understanding they would not be under the Office of Police Oversight unless but there may be a possibility of making that change. So I do think those questions about accountability need to be answered as that further analysis happens. And I just want to highlight, I know that the security officers, at least right now, it's my understanding our contract. Is that a long-term plan, or is that just a transitional phase? Because we are, moving as a city, I hope, as with our approved council policy, we're moving away from having long-term needs be met with contract staff. And so that too, if any of our savings if there are any savings, that's a savings that's not reflective of kind of how we want to staff our city.
So I would like to answer that question. First, point of clarification is we don't currently have 12 officers there. There used to be 13 officers. APD has already reallocated, I think, 7 to 8 of them. Right now, I think we only have 7 between the 2 courts. That's been possible because we have done the majority of our dockets online and have had reduced hours. All of that is increasing on December 6th. But as a stopgap, we did contract with a private security vendor. That contract is only through next June. So
Okay.
we will have to I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought because of the siren. But anyway, so the contract security has supplemented the reduction in APD resources, but it's temporary, so that'll have to be renewed.
Okay. So the officers have gone from 12/13 down to 7-ish. You're supplementing with contract security. That's an interim measure. And then there would have to be a different plan for beginning in June to take you through whenever the marshals were ready to get to work.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thanks. And then the intent would be just to have marshals, not contract security, supplementing the marshals.
Yes, that's the current plan.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Alter?
Thank you. I would like to better understand what your first choice is and how we might deliver that. I mean, if we're talking 18 months, we'll have at least 200 cadets who have gone through successfully through the classes at the pace that we're anticipating. My understanding is you're doing some of your work virtually, and hopefully some of that may continue, which does impact some of the level of need. I think there's, a broad switch in some of the choices that are being made about bringing folks to court and other kinds of things that may also affect the overall best use of resources. So I guess, I'm in the same place where I want to understand if this is the thing that's meeting the needs that we've identified. And obviously you're saying it's not your first choice. So I'd like to hear more about what your first choice is and then ask the city manager if we've exhausted every possibility to get to that.
So our first choice would be to continue with APD because, like I said, this is something new and it's a much bigger responsibility than has been our role in the past. So this is, the easier route would be if we could keep the APD officers who are already accustomed to court. I think Mr. Ariano can speak to the process and the analysis that went on and the determination that the Marshall program was the best route to go.
Thank you, Judge Statman. And I'll just say briefly, Councilmember, that really the analysis, and I know that I've heard from Councilmember Kitchen as well in terms of analysis. I think the analysis, and we can certainly go back and look at what the cost factors are and so forth, but I would say the analysis was as simple as some of the decisions we made around, somewhat similarly, park patrol. And so there's an area where we believed that the full breadth of law enforcement capabilities that APD has is better suited in patrol functions, and patrol certainly can be available to respond to park incidents, really by beefing up the park rangers program, who are more vetted in and informed in terms of park programs and so forth, was a better response and consistent with council direction 096 back in June. It is a little bit different. I'll admit certainly that we're trading off, if you will, certified peace officers, APD officers, for Peace of Marshal program, which are also certified peace officers under Texas state statute. Certainly glad to, and APD will continue to provide security services and will ramp up as the need comes back into the courts, as the judge is describing. But again, this represents our best recommendation at this time, given council direction.
I would like to add
sir.
one more
Go ahead.
piece, if I may.
Sure.
Ray, you didn't speak to this, but there was a lot of research that we conducted nationwide and statewide research on other jurisdictions and how they handled court security. And there was this kind of a mixed bag, but I mean, most of them are using a hybrid approach of law enforcement and private security. So this is industry standard.
So I'm concerned about the thing that was added on the end, because of council direction, because I'm still struggling with how, given the time frame that this is going to take, how this solves the problem. We're going to have 250 officers, graduate by then. Granted, there'll be some retirements, et cetera, but I'm just sort of struggling with out knowing how much training they need to do this role relative to elsewhere, the emphasis that we're placing on de-escalation and knowing the community, and I need to see some further analysis that provides greater clarity, that we have the guardrails that we've been seeking elsewhere. So again, as folks said, I'm open if we can get it right, but I would like it to be the right choice with the appropriate guardrails that we have been working really hard to achieve in our community, and absent a full understanding of the security challenges that are within our court. You shared a lot in your memo about sort of national trends. It's a little bit challenging to know what is the right solution and how much is precluded by just the APD staffing situation.
Colleagues, Councilmember Kassar.
I know we've been on this topic for a little while, but I just had wanted to make sure to put my position out there for the dais for Thursday, but for reasons that were most recently articulated here by Councilmember Alter, Councilmember Kitchen, and others, not ready to approve this on Thursday. I think there's been important discussion here today, but I don't think that between here and Thursday we'll be ready to approve this.
So that's my sense on this too. I mean, I'd like to have this come back, and I think that it could come back to us, pretty quickly, but some kind of statement that better explained what the guardrails were, what exactly will be the responsibilities, what will specifically not be their responsibilities, so that we know exactly what this is. It's helpful to know that it doesn't count against House Bill $1,900. It's good to know that the dollars are already in our budget. Then there's a budget line item that was approved for this in the municipal court budget. Was that dollar amount that was in the municipal court budget, I mean, to better understand, I don't have to ask the question now, but to better understand, we have in our budget right now paying for APD, paying for the security, I guess, that's happening. We also have a line item for marshals. Does one of those go away if we implement the marshals? Don't know. Do you know that?
Once APD is able to remove all their resources, that would just, it stays in their budget. I mean, it's in their budget now, so that would be an APD question on how those funds would be utilized.
And Mayor, what I would say is, again, we would then reallocate those officers to patrol. And so I understand that there certainly is always going to be a ramp-up period when you're transitioning from one program to another. And in this particular case, what we're trying to do is allocate APD resources to the full breadth of assignments that they can do, and then create this separate program that is much more focused, much like Councilmember Poole was saying with regard to Cap Metro's security solution.
No, and that part I understood. I'm trying to figure out what the mechanism is of moving those officers out of the court and back into patrol, and what that impact is on House Bill 1900. Because right now, the cost of those officers, I think, is being charged to the municipal court budget, as the arson investigators are being charged to the fire department budget. If we take the officers, APD officers that are there, we bring them back into the APD budget to be doing patrol, then it's going to move those officers over. That doesn't necessarily mean an increased spending for APD, because obviously we have a lot of funded unfilled positions. So I imagine that those 12 or 13 FTEs that are sworn officers that are in the municipal court budget would move over to APD without an increase in APT budget. That's my assumption, could be right or wrong, but that would mean that there wouldn't be any House Bill 19 impacts by moving those officers over. I'd like to have confirmation of that, and that's how that might be handled.
Yeah.
Ed, are you here?
We'll have to give you confirmation on that, Mayor. These positions have been back charged to the municipal court. What I don't know is we did put money in the budget for the Marshall program, $1.3 million. So what I need to verify is, did we remove that back charge already as part of the FY22 budget? If we did, there would be no difference in regards to House Bill 19. If we didn't and we were to remove it after the Marshall program is stood up, it would have the effect of increasing APD's budget, but we can confirm that in short order.
Okay, and even if it didn't, couldn't these 12 officers be moved to the already funded but unfilled positions in APD?
Yeah, we could make that work.
Right, so there's a mechanism to be able to do this without a 1900 impact, and I would just like us to look at that, because I think that's one of the concerns that I've heard. But I think if you could give us a better feel for the guardrails on this and description of what they do or not do, that would be helpful. Councilmember Tovo, and Councilmember Kelly.
Yeah, I'll just note that doesn't, the conversation we're having now about where those costs came from does not accord with the information I got during the budget process, unless I'm really having trouble aligning those. So who is paying the cost of those APD officers, I think is the first question that needs to be answered.
Okay, we'll take a look at the budget questions and align it with some of the questions that came on the dais today and get you answers.
Okay. Councilmember Kelly.
Thank you. One of my concerns is that while you're trying to put these officers back on patrol, that they might apply to work for your program, because a lot of the similarities and the tool roles are there. And so what I would hate to see happen is us lose additional APD officers by trying to fill this role in a different way. So I just wanted to daylight that possibility.
Councilmember Alter.
So as part of the follow-up, these were raised earlier, but we need to understand if these officers would be under the purview of the Office of Police Oversight and kind of what the transparency is. We also are going to be negotiating a contract with the APD, the APA next year. And so we need to understand how this interfaces potentially with that. And again, I'm still wondering whether the resources to set this up might be better utilized to make sure that the academy training facilities are able to process as many officers as we need through that process, because this seems very involved for 12 officers, whereas those resources could be put into, in terms of staff time and energy, could be put into the academy revamp and the academy setup in a way that would allow us to produce many more officers to meet the needs in the city over time, which is at some level a management challenge and figuring out. And it seems like it's somewhat the same people to some degree who are involved. But again, if there's a way to do this that is truly narrowing it, and we have confidence that they have the training that our community's been asking us with respect to de-escalation and knowing the community, I think we can have those conversations. I think the community has a lot of ideas, and it would be good to pause and at least listen to some of those, and I think they would be able and willing to provide that feedback pretty quickly, and we might find that there's some creative permutation of what's before us that might get us to a better place that addresses more of the needs that we have, recognizing that we need security at our court. So thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, Councilor Tovo.
I think just one last question that I'm going to have to mull over is if our court, if I understood you correctly, I think you were saying this would not be the absolute ideal structure. And given some of the questions, I think what I need to really sort out is there a strong advocate who believes that this is the best solution? We should continue all of these explorations.
And to me, what I heard was, it's not the ideal because it's not what we're doing, so it's going to be more involved. It has changed the responsibilities, and we need to check and make sure that that's appropriate. I like, as a general concept, to be taking responsibilities away from APD that are not necessary to a sworn officer with the training that APD has, as we do that with mental health, as we do that with parks, as we do that with other things. So for me, the questions I ask, in essence, go to that policy issue. Is this another opportunity for us to do that?
Okay, and so then it sounds like from the nods that I'm seeing here and your comments that there is still an interest in exploring whether there's a system that offers some of the benefits that we discussed. I just think that's a threshold question before we continue down this path.
As the mayor put it, it's not ideal for us because it's not something we've done before. And we have had the luxury of very competent officers who are familiar with court. As I understand it, that option to have APD there that's not on the table. So all the research that we have done, this is the best option going forward. With this option, we do have the opportunity to create something that does have those guardrails, that does have specialty training, and we believe can be a model for other courts. It's just going to be a lot of work and things that our court management, we haven't had this before. So there is going to be a learning curve. And that's, I would say, it's not a preference, it's a concern, maybe a little anxiety about moving forward, but we can do it and we will do it, and we have, the research shows that this is the best option that we have.
So I think that's part of the analysis you would be coming back with, is it that question? I mean, as a threshold matter, is this consistent with, is there a policy basis to do this? Which I think weighs doing what we've been doing because we know it, or doing something different because it drives a policy call of trying to get our police to focus on fighting crime as opposed to other ways we've been using the APD. So if you could bring that back to us, I think we've exhausted this topic. POs next.
Thank you, Mayor. My arm was getting a little tired there.
Sorry about that.
I just, I'm really supportive of the Marshall program. We will always be facing with officers having to be taken out, because if there's any situation happening in town where they're needed, they will be called and they will respond. And in the future, we never know. They might have to have a couple more reassigned to patrol, and now the community court is left with very few police officers. So, I would really encourage my colleagues to really maybe come up with some guardrails like it was mentioned and pursue the marshal, because now we don't have to worry. They'll be permanently assigned to the court. And I understand it might be a little bit more work, but I think that at the end, we will have a very successful program, because I really believe that we have staff that really knows their jobs and what they're doing and what's the requirement that's needed. And we could retrain these officers where, they respond to the situation that's needed in courtrooms and not what's needed out in other situations in the city. So I like the idea of having a marshal program with all the safeguards, and I think that we can accomplish that.
Thank you. Councilmember Kitchen.
Just wanted to add, as part of the information that we've requested, I just want clarification on why APD is off the table. Again, I can guess from the various things that we've talked about, but just adding that clarification would be helpful.
Okay. Manager, staff, you okay?
Yeah.
Doing
Just,
this?
again, open up the option for folks to provide that feedback. And so if you have ideas that you're hearing from your constituents or from community members on those guardrails or parameters, please pass it on to staff so we can incorporate that into a response.
Okay, that said, I would imagine that we'll postpone this item on Thursday, so it's not considered on Thursday, but bring it back just as rapidly as you think you can address the questions that have been raised. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Ray, thank you as well. Colleagues, and to the clerk, relative to our conversation earlier, we talked about doing a change. I don't think we're going to be able to do the change for next week, but certainly if it works to do the changes for signups in December, do that. Myrna, if you can't do it, then just let us know. So we're not asking you to do the impossible here. So you tell us when the appropriate time to do that is. And it was also suggested, as we bring back music, that more people might be able to see the music if we did it during the lunch break as opposed to over the evening break. And I don't know if there'd be any interest on the dais in moving music to that lunch break and trying that to see how that works. That might actually be something that saves us time during the day and might be able to be seen by more people. So without objection, I would say to the clerk, let's try that. That'll also force us to take a lunch break. Okay? All right.